Welcome to Steel Roses podcast, a podcast created for women by women. You are listening to Jenny again today, and I am incredibly excited to have a friend of mine on with me this evening for this evening's podcast, Kate. Kate, I met Kate last year when we had moved to South Jersey, and my husband came home from picking the kids up from the bus. And he said, "You'll never believe it. There's another set of twins in the neighborhood." So I'm always super excited for other twin moms to be around because twin experience is quite the experience. So Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on the podcast tonight.
I'm incredibly excited to talk to you. Tell us a little bit about you. Like, I know you, but tell us a little bit about your story. So you don't just have twins, you do have another child, the same setup as mine, basically.
Yeah. So that was another thing when I met you last year and found out that you had a singleton and then had twins. I was like, oh, good. So you live in chaos too.
Yeah.
So you understand the struggle.
I do have
a lot of times people have twins first and then they don't have more kids after that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I know. You know, I will say this though. My husband and I are always impressed because you and your husband always seem very like kind of calm, and we're always really wound up in my house. Like things are always kind of crazy, and I think we always bring that out too when we talk to people. Like we're pretty transparent. Like you know us, we're very like whatever, we don't care. And when we met you and your husband, we were like, wow, they're so chill.
Yeah. I don't know why people say that about us. We don't feel the same way about ourselves. But we have heard that before, that we always seem so calm, that we, don't really seem anxious about anything. When I remember a couple of weeks ago, one of my friends said in front of my husband, it just seems like Kate is so laid back. Like she doesn't really have any anxiety. And I thought he was going to choke on his drink. I don't know. I guess I just portray myself one way, or
you do. Well, you carry yourself very calm, which again, like because and for everyone listening, so it is a bit of like it's chaos, like straight up chaos in my household almost all the time. So we're really rigorous with schedule because when the kids were little, like so my son was 4 months old when I found out I was going to have twins. It was like the big reveal. I think it was funny because I was working in New York at the time and I was hustling my little guy out the door and I felt faint. And I was like, why do I feel faint? And then all of a sudden, this little light bulb in my head went off and I was like, hold on a second. Why do I feel faint? And I just had that gut like, oh my gosh, I think I'm pregnant again. And so it took, I always tell this story because it's a little bit funny, but it took like a week of pregnancy tests, like over the counter pregnancy tests for me to eventually tell my husband. Like I had 5 days of like, maybe this was the fluke, like a false positive. And then when we went for the first ultrasound, the tech brought my image up on screen and I was like, oh, cool. All right. There's the baby, like we're pregnant again. We're like, yay. And then I said, I was like, what's that little shape in the corner there? Like, what is that? And because she almost missed the twin and she moved the ultrasound piece over. And sure enough, there was this little tiny on the side. And she was like, oh, it's twins. And that was kind of like, I was like, pardon?
Oh, goodness. Well, yeah. So my older daughter was, I don't remember exactly how old, maybe 18 months or so when we found out that I was pregnant again. And, we were trying, so I was really excited. The first time that we had tried, I got a negative pregnancy test and I was really disheartened and I was so nervous that, it was so easy to get pregnant the first time. And I've heard that, the second time around, a lot of women have a lot more trouble getting pregnant. So I said,
okay.
I said to my husband, this is it. Like it came so easy to us the first time and now we're not going to be able to get pregnant the second time. And, I was so worked up about it. And that's just how I get so worked up so fast. I jump to conclusions. I get inside my own head, but I don't tell every single person what my thoughts are. I tell my husband,
yeah.
But I don't because it's so much to say to so many people. I just wouldn't be able to. It would be exhausting. So then I got the positive pregnancy test the next month, and I told him like the second I took the test.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Whole days to yourself. I was so excited. And then, but this is like around COVID times. So when I ultrasound done, the, doctor's office that I was going to explained to me that I couldn't bring my husband or anyone else with me because of the COVID, restrictions, and that I'd have to go in alone. And I was, kind of bummed about it, but also I was like, okay, well, it's baby number 2, it's second pregnancy. At least you got to be there for the first one. So it is what it is. But when I told him, he was like, I really wanted to be there though. Like, do you mind if I call around a few other offices and see if, I can get into another office? I was like, if you want to do that, sure. I don't want to call anyone else. I don't want to make this more of a headache. So he found another doctor's office, and I'm so, so grateful that he did, because when we went there for that ultrasound, I remember when I went there for my first pregnancy, it wasn't that long of an appointment. And this time around, I was there, I felt like forever. And I remember like holding my husband's hand and looking up at him from laying down on the table and being like, why is this taking so long? And just being like, could they have possibly already found an issue? Like, is this
that's scary?
Yeah. Whole pregnancy, like what could be going on? I was so nervous. But the day before, because when you get your confirmation pregnancy, they take your blood work and everything. And they ask you like, when was the day of your last menstrual cycle and all of that. So I guess like how high my HCG levels were just very, very high in comparison to when my last period was. So the doctor's office had called me to make sure that I didn't get my dates mixed up, but I knew that I had like kept track of it.
Yeah.
So well, it's just blood work. When you get your ultrasound done tomorrow, everything's going to be a lot more accurate. And I Googled it, like what could high HCG levels mean? And it said twins. But I was like, that's impossible though. Like there's no twins in our family.
Oh my gosh.
So
that's really funny.
So my best friend had come over that day or the next day to babysit my older daughter so that we can both go to the ultrasound. And she was like, oh, well, go say hi to your twins for the first time, or just like made some joke about it.
Oh my gosh.
Don't see that. And I came home and we found out it was twins, and I just handed her the pictures, like the ultrasound pictures. I couldn't even speak. I was normally such like a joking relationship, and I tell her everything too. I tell my husband everything, and then I'll like text her or FaceTime her and tell her everything too.
Yeah.
I did not even have words. I couldn't. I was like, I just handed her the pictures.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. I'm like gonna cry. That's such a nice story. That's such a nice story.
Beautiful at the moment though.
No.
I was terrified.
Yeah. Yeah, that like initial like realization, and for my pregnancy with the twins was high risk. Like immediately once you're twins, it does shift over. Like the treatment is different, but then mine was also high risk because my pregnancy was so close to my son's, and I had a C-section with my son.
Oh, right. And they tell you not to get pregnant.
You're not supposed to get pregnant right away. So they were pretty nervous about that. And I was commuting into New York at the time, and they literally were like, you have to when you get further along, like you won't be able to do that, because if somebody bumps you, your uterus could literally like rupture. Like you can't do that. So there was a lot of watch outs for that. And I will say this too, when we went for that initial sonogram or ultrasound, one of the girls was very tiny, and that's the one that we almost missed on the ultrasound. And, I was, the tech kind of brushed it off and was like, the way she said it kind of killed me. I'm going to try not to cry when I say this, but she goes, oh, well, sometimes that happens, but it's okay. Like the other one might absorb that twin. And I was like, what? And the way she said it was just very like, yeah, maybe it's not going to be twins though. And my husband and I got out of there and I was, devastated because I'm excited, but then I'm like, now I'm devastated. And we went home. he did like a ton of, he's not a research person per se. He did a ton of research. He comes home from work the next day. He was like, okay, I bought all these protein shakes. He was like pumping me full of protein. He was giving me dietary restrictions. He was like, you need to do this, this, and this. This is what you're going to do. And then at the next checkup, both were there. She was there. And it was like, I'm like, okay, like this is happening.
We love a supportive husband.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's very old school, which I love. Like, that's kind of why I picked him, because he's very like traditional, man of the house kind of husband. And which is funny because my colleagues were joking about that the other day, because I'm very, feminist, forward thinking.
Yeah.
And they're like, really? Like, you have it's like traditional household? I'm like, yeah, we're actually very traditional, but it's something that we had talked about like way before we had kids and way before any of this stuff. It was something that we just kind of knew. I wanted to circle back to you around like anxieties trying to get pregnant. Now, my situation was different because in both cases, they were surprises. So it was sort of just like there was never a time where I was like, we're trying to do this. It was more like God being like, oh, I know you've always wanted to have children. Here you go. I will say I've been exposed to, the hurdles that a lot of women go through, trying to get pregnant. I have a couple of family members that really had to jump through a lot of hoops, and they've told me some of the things that they were doing, like trying to, get pregnant. And I was always just kind of taken aback because and then it also made me a lot more sensitive to it, because kind of like what you said, like it's not, people kind of don't take that into consideration, like what it means to the woman when you're trying, because there's a lot of stigma around that. And then like, there's a lot of women who ultimately feel like, if I can't get pregnant, or if it's taking me so long, like what's wrong with me? Like I'm a problem here. And that's not the case.
No, not at all. And yeah, so we were definitely opposite situation than you, because we had talked for a long time about whether or not we wanted to have kids. Like we had a nice setup. We both had good jobs, and we enjoyed going out on vacation. We enjoyed going out to restaurants. We enjoyed not having to hope that we can get a babysitter in order for us to be able to go out. So we really kind of like weighed the pros and cons and thought, is this something that we want to do? And if so, when? And I, for a long time, told him, I think I'm good without having kids. And he was
really
like,
interesting.
Yeah. And
interesting.
He was kind of on the same side of the fence, and he was like, yeah, that sounds good. And then I don't know, things just kind of changed. And I was like, what do you think about maybe having, one kid? And I was like, and honestly, like, I don't even want to jump to conclusions and assume that I can get pregnant, because I don't know. And, I think with the use of social media and everything, like my eyes have really been opened up to the world of women struggling to get pregnant and trying and not happening. So I didn't want to get my hopes up. I didn't want to get his hopes up, but I said, why don't we try? And if it happens, then it happens. But if it doesn't happen, then we know that we'll be happy just not having kids and spending all of our money on ourselves. And, so the first time that we tried, I found out I was pregnant like
that's it.
4 weeks later. So I was like, okay, then. And that, and I really like motherhood did not and still does not come naturally to me. I obviously, this is 4.5 years later, and I am best friends with my daughter, and just, but then I remember having a sick feeling of regret and just thinking, I don't know that this was the right choice for me. And just, and I had heard so much about postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, but I said, oh, yeah, I'm sure that does happen to a lot of people, but I don't think that that's going to happen to me.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you. Did you get hit with postpartum depression?
So I never went to the doctor or got diagnosed with anything because I quite literally wouldn't leave my house. I locked myself in my room. I told my husband, just go away. I'll figure this out on my own. I don't need you here.
Yeah.
And I was so mean to him. I wouldn't answer my phone for anybody. I wouldn't let anyone come over. I didn't want to see anybody. So had I gone to the doctor, maybe I would have gotten diagnosed, but
Yeah.
I was just so hard on myself. I was like, why? You thought about this and you thought about this, and then you made this decision, and this is what happened to you. And now, you're stuck in this decision. It was so hard. It was like the hardest time of my entire life.
I'm glad you went there because I've said that before, and not in kind of same situations too. I'm not like a sharer, which is funny because I have a podcast. But for a long time I wasn't a sharer, and I wouldn't really talk about that kind of thing. But after I had my son, I remember I felt this immediate mental shift after I had him, and after him, I was okay. And I remember anxieties kind of really, my anxiety level started to get really bad, but it was controllable. I have this trigger, this is my habit that I am trying to break at this point, is that when I get really bad anxiety, I immediately try to control everything around me. That's what makes me feel better, gaining control.
Exactly.
So with one child, I was able to do that. And I was like, okay, I got this. I can handle this. And this is fine. But the twins, there was no sense to it. And I am always going to be grateful that this happened, but it was not planned for. This was not a decision that we were discuss this. And, so that in itself brought its own issues because it wasn't a situation that we had actually talked out and said, we're going to do this. After the twins, the hormonal fallout was so bad. And not even just the postpartum depression. I also never got diagnosed. I never went to the doctor for it. Now I advocate every time I talk to someone and say, go, just go. Don't feel bad about it. Go get something to help yourself. I never did that. And I always put a happy face for everybody and kind of just powered through it because that was my former motto, was keep your head down and just keep going and you can just get through this. And that's kind of how I treated the first 3 years of all their lives. I don't really remember that much either. And it's kind of sad because in that moment, all I was thinking was, I need to get through this. I have to get through this to the next day. The only way I can survive is to just keep plowing ahead. I think I was drinking those 5-hour energy shots, and because I was working full time and taking care of the kids and just really just trying to get all the way through it. I remember a moment after the babies were born, and I was it's kind of horrible to say, but I used to get mad at them for crying, and I would be yelling at their babies, and I would be yelling at them, but I was by myself at home with 3 babies, just trying to deal with it. I had, I think, maybe 2 hours of sleep a day. And I don't mean in one shot. I mean spread out in
2 hours at one shot sounds like a dream.
A dream, right? Oh my God. And that was the other thing. And then everyone would kind of come and be like, I used to get resentful when people would come over. I told my cousin, because after the twins were born, my cousin came up from Florida to help out. And I told her, I was like, don't sleep at the house with me. Don't sleep at the apartment because you're not going to make it. I'm barely surviving and I birthed these children. So you're just go ahead. And because it was, I think 1 or 2 days in and she needed a break. She was like, I need to. So she went and stayed with her mom. And I remember she came in, my cousin that does the podcast with me, she came in with her mom and they were freshly showered and cute, just outfits. And I was sloppy McSlop with stains and tired, and I smelled.
going.
And like, I remember they walked in, I was like, I can't believe anyone's coming in this house looking that fresh. And I'm like miserable. Like
Yeah.
it was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And
Hmm.
I like, yeah. And I always say that I'm like, I was straight up in survival mode, like the
Oh
whole
yeah.
time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. After, my older daughter was born, I was just in such a dark place that I
Yeah.
never in a million years would have anticipated that I would have been in, because I thought, well, I have my husband and he's so
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And we have, all of our parents, my in-laws, they all live so close. If we need help, we'll have help.
Yeah.
But I didn't want help. I was like, I should be able to do this on my own. And the stigma around motherhood is that if you aren't completely exhausted and spent by the end of the day, you didn't do it right.
Yeah.
You should be able to do it by yourself. If you're having your husband help you, you're not that good of a mom
Yeah.
because you shouldn't need that help. It should just
Mm,
come naturally to
naturally.
you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. And my husband was helping a lot. He was waking up with her and changing her diaper. And I was like, no, 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 I'm supposed to do that. And he's like, she's my daughter too. I'm like, but you're not the mom.
Yeah.
Like, where's this argument going? And I was like, why do I put all this pressure on myself? And I was trying so hard to breastfeed her.
Oh, I gave up on that really fast. I
Oh
gave up
yeah.
so
And
fast.
I put up such a fight, and I remember my husband had a bottle of formula, and I was like, get that out of the house. I was so livid, and he was like, just a bedtime bottle, and I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'm trying so hard, and you're trying to take this away from me. Oh my gosh, what a silly fight. And then about 2 months in, I stopped with breastfeeding her, and we just went to formula. And then when the twins are born, I was like, there's no way I'm reliving that.
Yeah.
You can get them formula immediately.
Did you get the so with my son, I actually kind of already knew. So I started giving myself a break almost, like, and cutting myself slack like pretty quickly, because I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do certain things. And like breastfeeding, I almost felt innately like, I was like, I know physically I can do this, but I don't think I can do this. Like, I just don't think I can weave that into my already like built out and crazy life. Like, and I'm like, I don't know how to take care of a baby. Like it's funny because I consider myself a smart person. And even like when it came to making my registry, I was like, what am I supposed to put in here? Like, I don't know what to do. And then I did all this research like on when I was pregnant and had to take care of myself while I was pregnant. And then I was creeping towards his due date. I was like, oh, whoa, what's supposed to happen after the baby? Wait, what do I do after he's here? Like, how am I supposed to handle all this? There's really no, like, you can read every baby book on the shelf, but nothing is going to prepare you for that experience. And I remember I was also pretty pissed too, because everybody that I had been friends with up until that point who had kids, and then even my mom, everybody had painted a pretty rosy friggin' picture. Like, I'm going to be honest, everyone had told me about this beautiful, magical tunnel of motherhood that like you mystically travel through, and it's just so wonderful, and you feel this immediate bond with your baby. And I remember when my son was born, I was holding him in the hospital, and I was looking at him, and I was giving like a face like this. And my cousin was like, Melissa flew up for my son's birth too. So she was in the hospital with me. And she's like, why are you looking at him like that? I was like, I don't really know him. I was like, I don't know him. I'm like, I'm getting to know him. Like, I'm trying to get to know this other person here. Like, there's all this like stigma around it. Like, you're supposed to put out exactly what you said. Like, you're this, I got this, mom. I've got it all covered. And it naturally comes to me, and I'm going to be beautifully flowing hair while all this is happening. I lost my hair after my pregnancies. Like, I was like bald for a while.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't even stress enough like how dark of a time that was for me. And I felt so much resentment towards everyone in my life because I was just thinking, none of you guys told me how hard this was.
Yeah.
No one. No one said anything.
Yeah, I was pretty pissed. I actually called my mom at one point, was like, what the hell? And she was
Hmm.
like, well, I just didn't remember, I guess. I was like, I was miserable. I was
Yeah.
miserable.
And looking back on it now, I was just purely just unprepared
Yeah.
because, now 4.5 years later, I don't even remember my life before my daughter was born. She is my absolute best friend. She's the
Hmm.
best part of my day every day. I just, I just love her
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that there was ever a time in my life where I felt regretful for having her, and it wasn't specifically just because it wasn't anything against my daughter. It was
Of
just,
course.
you have to give up. You live a certain selfish lifestyle when you don't have kids, and there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. You get
Mm-mm.
to live that way because you don't have to take care of anyone else.
Hmm.
And that is all that I knew.
Yeah.
And I just, there, like you said, you can read all the books, you can read all of the blogs, you can follow all these superstar moms on Instagram and think that you have a pretty good idea of what it's like, but you don't
No,
because
you won't ever
everyone's
know.
life at home is so much different.
Hmm.
And, it was just like the morning of one lifestyle and having to learn another one. But now, um, I am just so grateful. I'm so, so grateful. And when I think about the fact that I had two healthy pregnancies,
Yeah.
that I, brought all of my babies to term, I didn't have any NICU stays, that they're all healthy and happy, and, that they're here in my home under one roof.
Yeah.
I don't deserve that. To think like how many other women would love that opportunity and they don't get it. And I didn't do anything
Yeah.
spectacular to have deserved it. So I just, whenever I get frustrated with them, which, is like every 15 minutes or
Yeah. I was
so,
gonna say it's like every 10 minutes in this house.
yeah, I just have to remind myself, like, they're doing everything that they're supposed to be doing. They're
Yeah.
supposed to be screeching.
Mhm.
They're supposed to be asking for snacks every 7 minutes.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be doing things like that. And they're not doing anything abnormal. And, eventually I'm going to miss this stage. I don't know when that is.
Yes, I know.
I would love to not have all these toys all over my house and not to have screeching babies all the time, but it's just
Well,
the stage of life.
I will say this. I actually want to say something. You said it very eloquently, and I've never actually said it in this way, but you said it's the morning of one lifestyle, because I had never really thought of it like that, but that's so spot on, because I remember when I told my husband I was pregnant with our son, and he said to me, it was a weird comment, almost, again, surprises. So, but he was like, "Oh, well, you'll never ever be alone again." And I was like, "What?" And it kind of like, and it scared me. And in my next thought, I remember thinking to myself, like, I've been wanting a baby for so long, but now there's this human that I'm going to have to raise into a decent human being. That's it. Like, my time is over, kind of thing. And not like you're done. I did for a really long time felt like I had lost like Jenny to mom stuff. And it I didn't really feel like I gained any Jenny back until they were about 4. Like 4 to 5. Like when Vince was 5 and the girls were 4 was when I felt like I started being like Jenny again and feeling a little bit more like, okay, I'm never going to be this old Jenny. Because I used to say that a lot too. When I was pregnant with my son, I remember saying to like my coworkers, like, oh, don't worry, like regular Jenny's coming back soon, like soon as his baby, whatever. And then I had him and I was like, oh, regular Jenny's dead. Like, she's gone. That's never coming back. Now there's this other person and I have to figure this person out. And then we threw the twins into the mix, which I want to reiterate what you said too, in terms of like being grateful for it, because I've seen so many people struggle and not be able to conceive at all, or, like had to go jump through a bunch of hoops. Like, I've seen people that had just really traumatic births that they couldn't, go back again, like just things like that. And I am grateful because, and I actually, don't throw around a lot, like, oh, it was surprising, and we didn't plan. Like, I am mindful of that, because there are so many women out there that, you're right, like, would kill for this, and be like, I would kill for a surprise pregnancy. I would kill for that experience. So all that aside, like, I am very grateful that they're here, because they actually made me a better human in general, like across the board.
Gosh, I say the same thing about my kids all the time. They just give me such purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every single thing that I do is for them. I'm always thinking, like, when my kids are adults and they look back on the way that their mom acted, are they going to be proud, or are they going to be embarrassed? Like, you have to lead your life like that once you have kids.
Yes, exactly. And you know what I think a lot about too, because it's not just like me as a human, but also like me, like the things that I've done. And even this is going to sound a little strange, but like professionally, I made leaps and bounds after they were born, because to me, I was like, I come from a divorced family, and I remember being like, I need them to see a mom who's like killing it, basically. Like, mom needs to be good at home, but also good professionally. They need to see mom as like this strong purpose, like, person. And especially having daughters, I was like, they need to see strong mom. Like, they need to see that presence in the house. So all of that pushed me into like, I need to, like, leaps that I would have never taken before, I took, and I was successful with, because I was like, I have to do this. Like, they need to see it. And even this podcast, it was interesting. We had people visiting the one day, and I was doing a recording, and I heard the girls really, like, proudly saying, like, oh, mommy's doing her podcast. We have to be quiet. Okay. Yeah. Mommy records her podcast. And I was like, oh my God, they're like proud of me. Like, this is awesome. Like, this is such a great feeling.
It's such a nice feeling when they like appreciate what you do. They know what you do. My daughter always say, Mommy, you have to go to Merck, when she knows, like, I either teach online or I have to go to work in the morning. Oh my gosh. She's like, Mommy, I'm going to miss you. You got to go to Merck. You're always Mercking.
Yeah. I will say this too, because you mentioned I hope one day that there's not as many toys. I will say this, their toys now are consolidated mostly to their rooms, and we have like a very specific toy section now, and it is like board games, like big kid toys. So it's kind of cool to have that transition over. The other part that's really cool too, like, for example, like being able to say to them, like, all right, you guys have a movie night with Mima downstairs. Mommy's going to go podcast, like what I was telling you earlier, like everyone's downstairs having a movie night. And I was like, I'm going to be back. Like, I'm going to go do this. And they all got it. 2 or 3 years ago, they would have been banging on the door. Like, I would never be able to achieve something like this. So I know, like, somebody had told me, I think when they were like real little, I think they were like 2 or 3, and my little guy was little. And somebody had said to me, they're like, what you're going through right now is like the hardest time. When they're really little, it's like the hardest. And then once they like cross over that threshold into like 5, 6, 7, it starts to ease up. And you have like different problems at that point, because these guys bicker like you wouldn't believe. I remember fighting with my siblings, but this is like, just watching it from this angle, I'm like, but why do you need to fight over this? I'm like, can you please stop? So it's interesting watching like them get to this stage, from your stage over to this stage.
Yeah, because my daughter is 4, and then my twins, they'll be 2 in October, so they're still, babies. They're still little, but it was interesting when you said that even having kids has shaped you in your professional life too, not just like in your motherhood journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to my colleagues the other day that I just feel like since becoming a mom, I do think that I've become a better teacher, because I don't just view the students as students. Like, they're coming in, and this is someone's son, or this is someone's daughter. This is someone's brother or sister. Like, they go home, they have dinner with their family at night, and, they all have like their own like little personalities and their own nicknames at home and stuff like that. So I think like I view them like they're my own children, and I'm just so much more compassionate than I was when I started out as like a 22-year-old teacher.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now
being a
it's so much more personal.
well, it also like there's we talked about on one of the other pods, there's an actual physical change that happens in your brain after you have kids. Besides the hormonal fallout that we already talked about and like postpartum depression, which is very as you said, like it's traumatizing and it is a scary thing to go through. But there's this other definitive shift that happens. It doesn't happen to men, obviously, because they're not going through the birthing process. But whether you have a C-section or a natural birth, the chemical makeup of your brain actually changes after you have kids. And they think that it's due to a response. It's like a natural response that's readying your brain to understand that you have to now be aware of this other person. I can hear my kids get up and out of their beds from across the house. Like it's the craziest thing. Like there would be instances when we were in our apartment in North Jersey and they wouldn't have even cried yet. Like, but I would know that they were awake. And I would get up and he would be like, my husband would be like, what are you doing? Like, they're not crying. Like, what do you, and I'm like, they're going to cry. And I would be just stand there and wait for it. And then they would start crying. And he was like, how are you doing that? He was like, how do you, I'm like, I don't know. I was just able to like sense something.
Yeah. I remember my husband's friends had told me, you know, that she can tell when her sons are crying if it's because they're hungry, because they're sad, because they're hurt. Like they have different cries.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, you can't tell the difference. A cry is a cry is a cry, you know? And now it is so funny because she was so right. I could tell.
Yeah.
Like either you fell down and got hurt, someone took a toy away from you, you know, someone took your snack, or you're hungry or you're tired. Like you just know the different cries. And if you're not their mom, you're not going to know their different cries.
No.
Like you just have to raise them. You have to like be around them all the time. You just know their energy and you know what's going to set them off, what's going to make them cry.
That's, you know, I think that's an important point too. Like, you know, their energy, you're recognizing like their energy. And I think that's also why, like, you know, your children will respond to you. Like, obviously there's that connection period, you know, but they're going to respond to their mothers. I used to get really upset because with me, they're like crazy. And when they were little, they would see me and just start crying. And I was always like, I don't understand. Like if I had to, there was a few instances where I had to travel when they were babies. And my mother-in-law would come to the house to help my husband with the kids. And I would travel for work. And I would walk in the door like excited, like I miss my kids, like I miss them. And I would open the door and they would all kind of turn to me and just start crying and crawling towards me. And I was like, oh, great. Like, wonderful. Like they're crying. And eventually, like I had read somewhere and then I kind of caught on to it too, that I'm their safe spot. Like they'll kind of put on shows for everybody else. They'll put on errors for everybody else. If they're at daycare all day, they'll deal with daycare all day when they were little. But then when they would get to me, they would cry and they would crumble and they would crash. And I used to get so upset. I'm like, oh my God, like, can you just cut me a break? But I was their break. Like, I'm their person. And even to this day, like, Kate, I could be juggling balls of fire and they still will bypass my husband and be like, Mommy, can you?
Oh, yes. And that will set my husband off. He'll be like, you can see that she's busy and I'm right here and I'm your parent too. And I don't know what to tell you, babe. It's nothing personal. Sometimes they just want mommy. I would love for them to go to you.
Yeah, it's like all kids though. I've seen it like across the board. It's all kids.
Yeah.
They like make a beeline.
I have a twin hugging each leg, and then I'm holding my 4-year-old, and they're all just crying, losing their minds. And I'm like, okay, I guess we'll just stand here for a minute because I can't even take a step.
You can't even walk. You can't walk. That's so funny. They used to do that to me too. And I would have I have so many pictures because I've worked from home since 2017. So when the twins were born, I got my first job from home. And so I did a lot of multitasking and working while they were with me. And my husband has pictures of me with my laptop to the side and a child laying on my chest, a child laying on my leg, and a child under my arm. And then me with my mouse over here trying to continue doing a job. And
how you could function.
I had these headphones that I'm wearing, and I would be running whole productions, like virtual events, but the babies were on top of me, and they would just all fall asleep on top of me, and I would just stay like that until I was done with work. And then I would have to text my husband, like, can you please gather these babies and put them in their beds? But it truly was, that was like my way to kind of like continue to be a mother, but also be a professional and be able to kind of like mold it all together. And it's interesting because now, the twins set up an office in their room, and it like mimics like my little desk setup. It's really sweet, and I think it's really funny. And I'm like, I'm kind of rubbing off on them. I hope that like, what we're doing as parents is sticking, and like, that they're taking something away.
That's what you always hope for.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people always say like that toddlers and babies are like sponges. They soak up everything that you do, everything that you say, but you just don't realize how accurate that is.
Yeah.
Until they start walking and talking, and they really do mimic everything that you do.
Yeah.
Because I used to have the mouth of a sailor. And when I heard those words come out of my 2-year-old's mouth, I was like, well, that is all I needed to clean up my act. Now nothing like that. And I would always joke around with my husband, and like if he were being annoying, I'd be like, I'm going to contact the authorities. I will be dialing 911 and having you arrested, and just like joking with him, but not realizing that she's paying attention to me.
Yeah.
And then I remember one day we were coming home from daycare, and she saw a police officer had pulled over a car and had their sirens on. And she about lost her mind, had a full-on like anxiety attack in the back of the car because she was so scared there was a cop there. I was like, oh my God, I have traumatized you. Like, I was like, no, Charlotte, listen, police officers are good. They're there to protect us. I had to call my friend whose brother is a cop and be like, we need to have your brother come talk to Char because I've traumatized her. I need to do what I have done.
It's funny. Like, you do have to be careful. And like obviously when they're babies, like you don't think anything of it because you're like, whatever, they don't really get it.
Exactly.
I remember the first fight that Chris and I had in front of the kids that they knew that we were having a fight. And we were like driving on the turnpike or something like that. And he was like, I'm going to pull over and kick you out of the car. Something like that. We were like really going at it. Like it was one of those brutal ones that you have only when you have children. And so we were having one of those brutal fights. And I remember my little Vicente in the back going, no, mommy, no. And he started crying. And I was like, oh my God, just get us home, please. I was like,
oh gosh, yes. I made the mistake of telling my daughter that I was going to put her brother on the shelf at Costco. And I was like, I'll just leave him here. Maybe someone else will pick him up. And she's like, oh, do that. He has to come home with us. When I saw the fear in her eyes, I was like, oh my gosh, no, we're not leaving him.
No, I'm not actually going to do it. I also once said, I'm going to, oh my God, they weren't listening and going up the stairs. This is again when we were in North Jersey. And I was like, you know what, fine, I'll go up by myself. And strangers are going to take you. And I started obviously not really walking away. The devastation. And I was like, oh my God, never mind. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. And you're right. Like, you can't really say that after a certain point because they're like,
no, they take everything so seriously sometimes.
Yeah, it's very literal after a certain point.
Yeah, they don't ever take, sit down and eat dinner and stop getting up and walking around seriously.
No, that's not literal and that's not serious. But they will take it seriously if I tell them I'm going to leave them at the park.
That doesn't devastate them, apparently. But
no, I have no control over that. I'm not. Unfortunately, it makes me very upset, but I am not the rule person in this house. I thought I would be. I thought I was going to be the strict parent, and I'm not at all. And apparently I'm fun time mom. And like when Chris isn't here, they're like, yeah, we're going to eat, cookies on the couch. And I'm like, no, dude, no, don't do that. Like, I don't want crumbs on the couch. And they're like, Bobby's not here. We're good. And I'm like, wait, but I'm still present.
But I'm still here.
I'm still here, guys. But they know that. And Chris says it too. He's like, you're like, because I have to work all the time. Like, I'm always working. And so when I'm not working, I'm like, let's do something fun. Like, let's bust out of here. We're going to do activities.
I think the similar situation to what I go through too.
Yeah. I'm always like, let's do fun things. Let's do a bunch of stuff. Let's do all the activities. And,
Mhm.
it is what it is. It's okay though. I'm making my peace with it. And now I kind of use it to my advantage. And I'll be like, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to have to get boppy. And that's it. And then everybody kind of gets scared. And he doesn't love that. But I'm like, look, what am I going to do?
You gotta use what you have,
Right? I wanted to thank you before we wrap up for sharing what you went through after you had Shar and just the whole the gamut of like the postpartum depression and everything. And because I very lightly went through it, and then I was like grasping every vitamin I could off the shelf to try to like mitigate everything I was going through. But I think it's important to talk about it because there's so many people that go through that and they don't talk about it. And then like horrible things happen. And there's so many women that carry it with them as like shame almost. And it's like, no, actually, I think majority of us go through it, but nobody really talks about it. And it's not really brought to light. And then when you go through it, you're kind of shocked and like blindsided and you didn't expect it. So thank you for that. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I never would have talked about it, but I've come to, terms with it now, and I realized what was happening. And I would never, ever wish that on anybody. And
Yeah.
I was ashamed of it, and that's why I wouldn't leave. I wouldn't go see a doctor. And I just hope that, as time evolves, that women stop feeling that sense of shame because it's just a chemical imbalance. It's a hormonal response. Your body has just been put through the ringer.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to your lack of sleep.
Yep.
And your nutrients are probably all off because you're eating whatever you can, whenever you can in those first few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So to expect to not go through something like that after having given birth is unrealistic. The chances, I think, of having some sort of postpartum depression or anxiety or even anger.
Yeah.
I think I had a lot of postpartum anger as well. I think the likelihood is really high and that there's medication, there's therapy. People could do things to try to mitigate what I went through. And I wish that I had done something like that, but I just kind of rode out the storm and it lasted a lot longer than it needed to.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's unfortunately a theme in general across women disease states that we cope and we don't really address it and we just deal with it. And as you said, like we feel like we need to be perfect and we need to just do it ourselves. And we have to change that conversation entirely, which is basically the platform and why we started this podcast. We want to change that conversation. So I really, really appreciate you sharing that because that was, I think that's going to reach a lot of people. So thank you. Any last thoughts before I close us? Bring us to a close. Anything?
Well, I just want to say thanks so much for having me on your podcast. This was a lot of fun, and I'm really happy that we got to talk about so many of the different topics that, we covered.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on with me. I appreciate it, especially since it's bedtime. While we're recording, guys, it's bedtime for all of our children. So we all need to go. You can find all of our previous episodes if you need to via our website, www.steelroseswomen.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Steel Roses Podcast. If you have any topic recommendations or if you're interested in guesting, you can reach out to me on there. Thank you for listening. We greatly appreciate you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.